I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I didn't even let my expression change when the first suspicion flickered through me. Instead, I went quiet, so quiet that even I barely recognized myself. And in that silence, I began moving things. Small things at first, then larger ones. Money I'd earned. Investments I'd tended. Pieces of my life I sensed were no longer safe in plain sight. 2 weeks later, my husband walked into our kitchen wearing a smile that didn't reach his eyes and told me he had filed for divorce. There was a glimmer in his face, something triumphant, almost smug, as if he expected to watch me fall apart. But the moment he realized I had already protected myself, every asset, every account, every part of my future, his expression collapsed in on itself. And for just an instant, the quiet woman he thought he was blindsiding became the one thing he couldn't predict. My name is Sarah Rowan. And what I'm about to share is the chapter of my life. I never believed I'd live through the unraveling of a marriage and the rebuilding of myself in the wreckage. Before I begin, if you're listening, let me know you're here. Tell me you're listening, or tell me where you are hearing this from. Somehow it makes all of this feel less like a confession and more like a connection. Seattle had one of those soft, misting rains that make the whole city look blurred around the edges. Like someone smudged the skyline with their thumb. Inside our house on Capitol Crest, everything felt comfortably familiar. There were the plants I kept near the windowsill, their leaves bright and glossy from the humidity. The soft playlist humming in the background, the one my husband Callan and I always cooked to. And the framed print still leaning against the wall, exactly where it had sat for nearly a year. A piece of art waiting for a moment we kept promising to find but never did. Once. That unfinished detail made me smile, something about us being too busy living to perfect the little things. But lately, it felt like a warning I didn't understand yet. Something incomplete. Something unsettled. Callan stood beside me at the counter, slicing peppers with absent-minded ease. He nudged me with his hip, a playful bump we'd done for years. For a fleeting moment, it felt like nothing had changed. Like we were still the couple who laughed our way through burnt dinners and midnight grocery runs. You forgot to turn off your alarm again, I teased lightly. Tilting my head at his phone on the counter, he chuckled, brushing it off. Deadlines are brutal today. His phone lay face up, unlocked, unguarded, exactly how it had always been. I used to pick it up without asking, scrolling through our silly photos. The ones from hiking trips and beach days and anniversary dinners. We were open. We were easy. We were... I stopped after dinner. He grabbed his phone and did something so small I almost didn't notice. He slid his thumb down and turned on Do Not Disturb. Callan had never done that. Not once in our 6 years together. A tiny cold knot formed in my stomach. I told myself it meant nothing. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe his boss was calling too much. Anything. Anything besides. The whisper my instincts were trying to push through. A few days later, the knot tightened. He added a passcode to his phone. Not a casual 4-digit code, but a full lockdown system. Suddenly, when his phone buzzed, he'd leave the room to answer. When I asked if he was working late again, he gave me a flat, clipped yes without looking at me, and he came home smelling different. Not wrong, exactly, just not familiar. A sharper cologne. A scent chosen with intention. I told myself not to spiral. Not to read into things that might have simple explanations. But then I opened our joint account to pay a bill and I saw transactions I didn't recognize. Small ones. Ones someone might overlook. But I pay attention, always have. And these didn't fit anywhere in our routine. Merchant names that meant nothing. Repeated charges at odd intervals. A transfer labeled something too vague to be accidental. That night, I sat at our dining table with a cup of tea and wrote a single line in my journal, under the warm glow of the lamp. If these are signs, I need proof. The proof found me faster than I expected. I was driving through the city on my way to meet a client when I saw him. Callan stood outside a small coffee shop, half sheltered under the awning, his posture tight. He had his phone pressed to his ear, and even from across the street, I could see the strain in his expression. I slowed the car but stayed hidden behind. Rain-streaked glass. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I didn't want to hear anything. But fragments of his voice drifted across the wet pavement anyway. It's almost ready. Once the settlement goes through, everything's lined up. Settlement. Almost ready. Then another voice, female, sharp, controlled cut through. Don't waver. Make sure she feels guilty about all of it. And he answered her softly. I know, Ivy, I know. The name felt like a stone dropping inside my chest. Something hollow and echoing opened up inside me. I didn't confront him. I didn't pull over. I didn't call or cry or scream. I just drove quietly, steadily, because in that moment I realized something important. Emotion wouldn't save me. Information would dot the next morning. When he left for work, I turned on his laptop. I had always known the password. He never bothered to change it before. Even after locking his phone, my hands only trembled once. Inside his calendar was an appointment set weeks earlier, consultation, evergreen mediation. My stomach went cold. Almost numbed out, I checked our bank again, looking deeper this time. The vague transactions now connected to a hidden secondary account, one I never knew existed. A series of payments to the mediation service appeared too, spaced out but consistent. Nothing random. Nothing impulsive. A plan that didn't include me. I took screenshots, saved them in 2 places, then backed them up onto a small external drive I hid behind my office books. Just as I snapped the drive shut, my phone rang. Callan, you home? He asked casually. My pulse slammed in my ears. Yeah, I said, forcing my voice to stay stable. Just finishing paperwork. It was the first time I had ever lied to him. The first time I realized I needed distance, a shield. Later that afternoon, I met with a lawyer named Clara in a small cafe near the Market District. She had a calmness about her, quiet, assured, and unshakable. I spread the screenshots across the table. She took them in, analyzing each one with sharp, deliberate focus. If he's preparing for a divorce, she said gently, then taking steps to protect your assets isn't betrayal. It's survival. Her words slid into me like both a balm and a blade. As she explained the option of an irrevocable trust, a legal boundary that would separate my assets from anything he might try to lay claim to. It had to be done quietly, carefully, and soon. This can be your shield, she told me. Not against a partner, but against someone preparing to become an opponent. As we stood to leave, she added, if there's another woman involved, she may try to influence his decisions. Be ready for messages or data to disappear. I can help verify timelines if needed. Her warning settled over me like a cold shadow. I walked out of the cafe knowing exactly what I needed to do. That night, I began the first steps toward creating the trust. I barely slept. By morning, the unease had settled into determination. I pulled up the shared GPS system we'd linked years ago for convenience, back when trust was effortless. An address appeared repeatedly across the last month. Riverview Apartments, Fremont. He had no reason to be there. None he had ever shared. I drove to the area under the excuse of a migraine, circling the block twice. On the third pass, the building's front door opened. Callan walked out. And beside him was a woman with striking dark hair, dressed in a tailored coat with a designer bag hanging easily at her wrist. She didn't touch him, but the air between them spoke volumes. I whispered to myself, barely audible, I'm not imagining any of this. I didn't stay. Didn't confront. Didn't cry. Instead, I drove to a dim bar near the Lake District and sat with my hands wrapped around a cold glass, studying myself. 10 minutes later, someone slid into the seat across from me. Noah. He'd worked with Callan for years. Someone I always thought of as a friendly acquaintance, but not much more. I wasn't sure I should get involved. He muttered, eyes uneasy. But you need to see this. He handed me his phone. Messages between Callan and Ivy filled the screen. Not flirtatious. Not emotional. Strategic. Calculated. Cold. Instructions on what to demand. How to manipulate guilt. How to position himself as the aggrieved party. I handed the phone back slowly. Thank you, I whispered. I know what I need to do now. That night I made a list, every asset, every account, every property tied to my name. My future written out in black ink. I called my mother, told her I needed help safeguarding some things. She didn't question me. She simply said to come in the morning. Then I called Clara. She began preparing the documents immediately. Before bed, I paused in our doorway, watching Callan sleep. He looked peaceful, unaware. For a moment, grief washed over me, not for the man he was now, but for who he'd once been. I whispered, almost to myself. Tomorrow everything changes. The next morning my mother drove with me to the notary office. Each signature felt like cutting another invisible thread tying me to the life I thought I had. When the notary stamped the final page, I nearly exhaled for the first time in days. We were safe, legally, financially, quietly. But emotionally, I wasn't sure what safety even meant anymore. When I got home, I found Callan humming in the kitchen, stirring eggs as though nothing had shifted between us. He kissed my cheek, talked about weekend plans, suggested we visit the restaurant where we had our first date. His voice was light. Too light, performative. Maybe later, I said, keeping my expression calm. Then he asked if we should straighten out our joint accounts, make things neater. He said. My heart jolted, but I smiled casually. We'll figure it out later. I retreated to my office. Closing the door before the mask slipped, I called Clara. It's done, I whispered. Everything is notarized. Good, she said. From this moment on, he has no claim to anything transferred into the trust. Then her voice softened with caution. But if he's been notarizing documents recently, he may be preparing something unusual. Stay alert. I hung up and sat there, breathing through the storm inside my chest. Later, when I walked back into the living room, Callan was lounging on the couch with his phone, relaxed and utterly unaware, and I thought, with a quiet certainty, if he filed tomorrow, you will walk away with nothing. I'd become two versions of myself without meaning to. One who smiled beside Callan at the breakfast table, nodding along to his plans, laughing at the right moments. And the other quiet, sharpened, a woman pulling her life back piece by piece before someone else tried to take it. That duality carried me into the next step of the truth I needed to confirm. Something I wished more than anything wasn't real. I walked into a glass and steel marketing office downtown, pretending to be someone else entirely. A potential client. A curious small business owner. Anyone but the wife of a man tangled up with one of their employees. The building smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive lotion, the kind people keep at communal sinks and places where appearances matter more than comfort. A receptionist with a perfected smile welcomed me, her voice chirpy and pleasant, and directed me to wait for a strategist who handled brand campaigns. I didn't ask for Ivy directly. That would have been too bold, too obvious. I simply explained I was looking for help with outreach. They ushered me into a bright meeting room where a woman with a sleek haircut greeted me warmly. She chatted effortlessly as she pulled up previous campaign examples on a mounted screen. While she talked, I scanned the wall of office photos behind her team retreats, brainstorming sessions, holiday parties. I wondered if Ivy's face was hidden somewhere in that collage, smiling knowingly at a camera that had no idea what she was orchestrating behind the scenes. 5 minutes in, the strategist laughed about an internal story and casually mentioned Ivy's name. She's been helping her friend restructure his life through a rough separation. She's really good at guiding people through big transitions. Honestly, she has a couple of case studies. I kept my expression neutral, even though her words landed like a weight sliding into place. This wasn't just an affair. Ivy had done this before. She wasn't stumbling into something reckless, she was designing it with deliberate precision. I thanked the woman for her time, pocketed her business card, and walked out with a hollow ache in my chest. The cool air outside stung my lungs, and part of me wished I hadn't come. But the larger part was relieved because now I understood exactly what kind of opponent I was dealing with. That evening, when I stepped into the house, the lights were low. The air smelled faintly of burnt paper. I walked into the kitchen and froze. Callan stood beside a metal waste bin, feeding thin sheets of paper into a small flame. The orange glow flickered across his face, reflecting shadows in his eyes. His movements were quick and purposeful. He didn't hear me at first, too focused on destroying whatever lay in his hands. When he finally turned, he startled slightly, then forced a smile so thin it barely lifted his lips. "Hey," he said lightly, as if he wasn't burning documents in the dark. "Just cleaning out stuff I don't need." I glanced at the ashes dissolving in the sink, the ink bleeding into gray spirals as the water carried it away. Before the final page broke apart, I saw enough to know what it had been: evergreen mediation. A preparation list. A strategy outline. He was eliminating evidence of his planning. "You want to switch to your own account?" he asked suddenly, pretending to wipe his hands on a towel. "Might be easier for both of us." A test. No, an assessment. He was checking my reactions, looking for cracks. I kept my face neutral, my voice easy. Maybe later. I'm exhausted. He nodded, studying me with a look I couldn't decipher. Suspicion? Curiosity? Or something darker, fear of losing control? I walked out of the kitchen before he could ask anything else, but my heartbeat didn't slow until I reached the living room. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea, grounding myself with the warmth. Halfway through stirring honey into the cup, my phone buzzed. It was Noah again. They're trying to speed things up, he said without even greeting me. Ivy told him to file as soon as possible. She said your calmness worries her. I closed my eyes. My calmness worried her. It wasn't enough for them to undermine my life. They wanted to control my emotions too. She told him to push you harder, Noah continued. To guilt you. To make you react so you wouldn't have time to think. My grip tightened on the mug. So that had been the plan. Confusion, pressure, emotional chaos. The perfect smokescreen for someone trying to dismantle my stability. But the calmness she feared wasn't an act. It was armor. Thank you, I whispered after we ended the call. I reached for the folder I kept hidden behind the bookshelf. Inside it, my list grew: assets, documents, records, dates. Every piece of my life cataloged and protected. The next day, Callan cornered me in the kitchen. His demeanor was sharp, restless. You've been distant, he said in a tone that masqueraded as concern. Sneaking out early, running errands without telling me. What's going on? I met his gaze evenly. Work has been demanding. And my mother needed help. He stared at me, trying to read between the lines of my calm. It frightened him. He couldn't shape a storm if I refused to give him clouds. His hand hit the counter suddenly, palm slapping the surface hard enough to echo. Not threatening, just controlled aggression. A warning disguised as frustration. I didn't flinch. That seemed to frustrate him more. Asterisk, for a split second, I saw something like fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, fear of losing the plan. That night, the air in the house felt too still, too expectant. Like waiting for a storm that refused to break. And then it happened. We need to talk, he said quietly. Placing a thin manila envelope on the dining table, I stared at it. The weight of the world seemed to settle inside that fragile packet. I'm filing, he continued, voice oddly gentle, almost rehearsed. I think it's the healthiest thing for both of us. Healthy. As if betrayal were nutritious. He opened his mouth to continue, but I barely heard the rest. Words about space. About clarity. About starting new chapters. All delivered with the softness of a man who believed he held the upper hand. Then he laid out his demands. Half the house. A portion of my investments. Monthly support. He sounded like a man reading from a script written by someone else. I watched him, realizing there was nothing left to feel, not anger, not heartbreak. Just a quiet confirmation of everything I already knew. Later that night, an anonymous email arrived in the secondary account I rarely used. The subject line read, friendly advice. Inside, the message was curt, almost polite. You should settle quickly. Things could become more complicated if you delay. No signature. No identifying information. Just a hint of threat wrapped in courtesy, but the digital fingerprints told a different story. I checked the header and traced the first hop to a block of addresses used near Ivy's office. She wasn't just advising him. She was monitoring the situation directly. Preparing pressure points, I closed the email, feeling a strange steadiness settle through me. Each move they made revealed more. Late that night, I logged into our joint account and monitored activity. For the first time since transferring my assets, I saw the panic hit him. Multiple failed login attempts. Password resets. Access denials. Timestamps scattered across the early hours of the morning. He was discovering the doors were locked. He was discovering I had moved faster. He was discovering I wasn't the silent, compliant character he imagined. By dawn, I saw the desperation ripple through him. His attempts grew frequent, sloppy. The next morning he approached me with forced nonchalance. Did you change something with the accounts? He asked, trying to sound casual. There were some system issues, I answered without hesitation. The bank's been updating things. I had trouble logging in too. He studied me again, searching for a tell. But I had become unreadable. His confidence began to falter, and with it, the whole fragile structure of their strategy. I woke the next morning before sunrise. The house felt foreign in its silence, as though the walls themselves had stepped back, letting me move through the space as a different person. I gathered everything Clara had prepared: trust documents, timestamp transfers, verification certificates, all neatly filed in a leather folder. My hands didn't shake. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I finally understood fear was secondary to preparation. When Callan arrived at the mediation office, he entered like someone stepping onto a stage. He wore a new coat, a new cologne, a new expression. Confidence poured off him in waves. His lawyer walked beside him, straight-backed and overly polished. He believed everything was already his. He believed he had played his part flawlessly. He believed I would crumble inside the conference room. He sat down with the relaxed posture of a man expecting a favorable outcome. His phone lit up with a message from Ivy, and I watched him smirk before sliding it face down. The mediation began with formal introductions. His lawyer spoke first, calm, composed, but carrying an undercurrent of assertiveness. He outlined demands that sounded strangely mechanical, as if memorized word for word. Callan sat back, fingers interlaced, watching me for any sign of weakness. When it was Claire's turn, she didn't raise her voice or match his lawyer's theatrics. She calmly opened her briefcase and placed a thick packet of documents on the table. "These," she said, sliding them forward, "are the verified filings for the Rowan Trust. All major assets were transferred into this trust well before the divorce was initiated." She laid out printed bank statements, notarized deeds, and time-stamped transfers. As of today, none of the assets listed in Mr. Rowan's petition are legally accessible to him. The shift in the room was immediate. The mediator leaned in. His lawyer stiffened. Scanning the documents, Callan's smirk vanished, replaced by something brittle and stunned. He whispered urgently to his attorney. His attorney did not meet his eyes. His entire strategy, every secret meeting, every coached message, all of it cracked in an instant, and I simply watched. When he finally turned to me, his voice came out small, thin, and strained. "When did you do this?" I held his gaze. "When I realized you were planning something you didn't have the courage to say aloud." His face reddened. His breath hitched in frustration. His lawyer attempted a rebuttal, but Clara countered every angle with calm certainty. Every piece of proof was airtight, every timeline beyond dispute. With his options dwindling, Callan muttered under his breath, "I prepared everything." Everything. The mediator heard him. And with that, he unknowingly validated every one of my suspicions that he had masterminded this for months. That Ivy had guided him, that the betrayal was methodical, not emotional. His lawyer requested a break moments later. Callan shot up from his chair, pacing the hallway just outside the glass doors. His hands tugged at his hair, his steps uneven. He looked like a man watching the walls of his plan crumble around him. I stayed seated, letting the quiet surround me. For the first time in months, I felt something like air returning to my lungs. When he finally returned, his expression had changed. Anger warred with confusion, embarrassment with desperation. "Why would you do that?" he asked softly. "Why go that far?" I met him with the truth he never expected to hear. I protected what I built. You tried to take it. That's the only far there is. He swallowed hard. When I said Ivy's name, when I mentioned the messages, the influence, the manipulation, his jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply muttered. I was under a lot of pressure. As if pressure were a justification. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. Noah. He had forwarded the last set of messages, screenshots someone inside their circle sent anonymously. Ivy's tone was sharper now, urgent, irritated. If you don't file this week, I'm done. When the settlement comes through, we'll be set. Just push her. She's too calm. She hadn't loved him. She hadn't even liked him. She'd invested in an outcome, and the moment the outcome failed, so did her interest. When mediation resumed, it was little more than a formality. His lawyer admitted they had no grounds to pursue assets already secured in the trust. The mediator confirmed the legality of the transfers. Everything that had been mine remained mine. His strategy dissolved into nothing more than scattered ash, just like the documents he'd burned in the kitchen. Hoping to erase the evidence of his intentions, there was no triumphant ending. No dramatic outburst. Just the soft scrape of chairs as the session ended. I walked out knowing the storm had broken. And I was still standing. Asterisk, the mediation ended with a silence so deep it felt like the room itself was exhaling. Papers were sorted, pens capped, chairs pushed in. No one spoke because there was nothing left to fight for, at least not on his side. Callan stood there looking dazed, as if the world he had rehearsed in his mind had shattered too quietly for him to react. His confidence had evaporated, leaving a hollowed-out confusion in its place. A week went by. I tried to settle back into a rhythm, though everything felt suspended in a quiet, surreal space. I learned through a mutual acquaintance, someone who'd always been too chatty for their own good, that Ivy had vanished. She blocked Callan on everything, disappeared from her Fremont apartment, and transferred out of her firm's Seattle office altogether. It happened so swiftly, it almost felt like she evaporated. She had never been committed to him. She'd been committed to the outcome. The moment the payout she had planned dissolved, she abandoned him the way someone flicks a smudge from a sleeve, annoyed. Unbothered and done. I heard that Callan tried calling her, messaging her, even showing up at her workplace. But she'd already slipped through a crack in the narrative she had written. And I realized then that the tragedy he suffered wasn't heartbreak. It was humiliation. For a moment, a very small one, I wondered if he regretted anything. If he sat alone in an empty apartment thinking about the choices that had led him there. But the thought drifted off like a loose leaf in the wind. Some questions didn't deserve answers. At home, life moved slowly. My mother came over one morning with paint samples tucked under her arm. She didn't ask permission. She simply set them on the counter and said, "Let's make this space yours again." We spent hours repainting the living room, covering the muted gray with a warm, soft cream that reminded me of morning light. We pulled down old frames, rearranged furniture, and left the wall where our wedding photo once hung completely bare. The emptiness of that wall didn't feel sad or haunting. It felt like a clean breath. A pause before something new. As the room transformed, I realized something inside me was shifting too. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt steady, certain, awake in a way I hadn't felt for years. Several days later, Callan sent a message. His name glowing on my phone didn't sting the way I expected. My chest didn't tighten. The world didn't tilt. I was simply still. His message was long, almost manic in how quickly the thoughts shifted. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize everything would fall apart like this. I miss us. We should talk. I don't know how this got so out of control." He tried to sound sad, remorseful, lost, but every line read like someone grieving the consequences, not the actions. I read the message once slowly, carefully, letting each word pass through me like water through cupped hands. Then I deleted it, not in anger, not to punish him, but because I had nothing left to give that situation, not space, not emotion, not explanations. I had already walked out of that story. I wasn't stepping back in. That afternoon, I stepped onto my front porch. The sky hung low with Seattle's familiar gray, that soft washed-out color that comes just before rain. The air smelled like damp earth and quiet. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a warning. It felt like calm. It felt like peace. The marriage hadn't ended when he filed for divorce. And it didn't end when the mediator closed the folder, or when Ivy vanished, or when the last of his messages flickered out of my inbox. It ended the moment I realized I deserved a life that didn't require me to shrink myself to stay safe. It ended when I understood that someone who truly loved me would never ask me to gamble my stability so they could secure theirs. It ended in the quiet revelation that choosing myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Standing on that porch, listening to the subtle hush of wind through the cedar trees, I felt something loosen in my chest. Something old and heavy that had been clinging there for far too long. I was free, not because he left, not because I won legally, not because Ivy disappeared. I was free because I chose myself over the version of my life that was slowly breaking me apart. The truth no one tells. You is this. You don't lose when something ends. You lose when you stay somewhere that no longer holds you with care. I could have fought for that marriage. I could have begged, argued, clung to the hope that the man I loved still lived inside his skin. But that version of him had been gone long before the first hidden message, long before the new cologne, long before Ivy and her careful manipulation. The most painful part wasn't discovering the betrayal. It was recognizing that I had been fighting for something already gone. People think leaving is the hard part. They're wrong. The real battle is choosing yourself after years of convincing yourself that your needs can wait, that your boundaries are flexible, that love excuses behavior that erodes your spirit. Choosing myself wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost gentle. It sounded like asterisk. I deserve safety. I deserve honesty. I deserve a life that doesn't require me to brace for impact. If someone listening is standing in that same uncertain place, wondering whether to hold on or let go, wondering whether protecting yourself is disloyal, I want you to hear me clearly. Asterisk, it's not just okay to choose yourself. It's brave. It's necessary. It's the first step toward the life you're meant to have. You do not owe someone the power to break you. You do not owe someone access to the parts of you they tried to exploit. And you do not owe someone the version of yourself that existed before you learned the truth. Letting go isn't failure. Letting go is freedom. I didn't walk away from my marriage because I stopped loving who he used to be. I walked away because I finally loved myself enough to stop accepting who he had become. When the first drop of rain finally fell, tapping softly against the porch railing, I inhaled deeply and realized the air felt different, lighter somehow. Almost new. The chapters ahead were uncertain. I didn't know what the next months would bring. I didn't have a perfect plan, a guaranteed path, or a promise of where I'd end up, but I did have one thing. The most important thing. My story fully mine again, and from that moment on, I wasn't writing it out of fear or desperation or survival. I was writing it from a place of strength, a place of peace, a place that belonged to me. And whatever comes next, I know this much with absolute certainty: I am no longer afraid of starting over. I'm only afraid of ever losing myself again.